How many of you can remember good old Sohcahtoa? Or Oscar had a heap of apples, or oh heck, another hour of algebra. However it was that you remembered this lovely little ratio of sides, each of them represent the fact that sine is the opposite over hypotenuse, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, and tangent is opposite over adjacent. Good. So we're going to use this today in addressing some questions that maybe you haven't thought of before. If sine of x equals 1/2, find cosine of x and tangent of x. Now that shouldn't be any problem because we can look right at the chart. You would look to see that sine of is equal to 1/2 at pi over 6, and so then you would say, okay, well, cosine then at pi over 6 would be root 3 over 2 plus or minus, right, because we don't know the quadrant, and tangent, of course, would be 1 over root 3 plus or minus, again, since we don't know the quadrant. But what if instead it said if sine of x equals 2 over 3? What does this mean? Because that's not in our chart, and it's certainly not identifiable on our graph, so it's hard for us to figure out what angle that would be. But we still need to figure out what is cosine and what is tangent. There's got to be a way that we can do that, and of course this relates to Sohcahtoa and those old methods that you did a long time ago. So the idea is that this is all right triangle trigonometry. So what you're going to do is you're going to start by drawing a triangle. Now we understand through Sohcahtoa that sine is the opposite over hypotenuse. Now I usually use this base angle here as my x. This is where I am standing. So when I say opposite, I am talking opposite of this angle. Now it really doesn't matter. Whichever one you're making your post at, it's opposite that side, and then the hypotenuse, of course, is the one across to the right angle. Now, when you're examining this, in order to do cosine, which involves adjacent, and tangent, which involves adjacent, we need to actually find this third side. So any thoughts as to how we could find that third side? It's a right triangle, correct? So there's got to be a method, and it rhymes with Pythagorean. Good, Pythagorean theorem. Pythagorean theorem. And the Pythagorean theorem is a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So if I know that 2 would be a, what's the 3? Is that b or is that c? And then hopefully you all remember that the hypotenuse has to be c. And so the 3 has to go in that spot with the c. So we have 4 plus b squared equals 9. So I have b squared equals 5. So I get b equals, and yes, plus or minus the square root of 5. Don't neglect that. Now, although you might say, but this is a distance, remember we're talking about quadrants in sine and cosine. And so when we're dealing with this, it becomes, again, very apparent that we don't know the quadrant. So that's why the plus or the minus. It helps us with direction. So if I was to ask you what is the cosine of x here, then we would do adjacent plus or minus the square root of 5 over hypotenuse. And the tangent would be opposite 2 over plus or minus the square root of 5. Regardless, it gives us the same type of answer, plus or minus. So let's try another one. If tangent of x equals 4 over 3, find the cosine and sine. If you would, I'd like you to go right ahead and try to do this one on your own and see if you can do that. Pause the video and come back and you'll see me working through it on my own, and I'll even talk you through it. So go ahead and do that. All right, as you come back here, the idea is that you drew a right triangle, and tangent is opposite over adjacent. Again, to find that third side, we're going to use Pythagorean theorem, and since we don't know the hypotenuse, then C is the one that we have blank. So we have 9 plus 16 equals c squared, or maybe you even recognize this as being one of the Pythagorean triples and quickly knew that this was going to be 5. But don't forget that and take for granted the fact that it is in fact plus or minus, because you did still have to do that square root, despite the fact that you could do it in your head. So if I asked you for the cosine of x, that would be adjacent over hypotenuse, so that would be plus or minus 3/5. And the sine of that same angle would be opposite over hypotenuse, which would be plus or minus 4/5. All right, lastly, because this does show up in our packets on the next day, I'd like you to give this one a try in your thoughts as to how to do this for tomorrow's class. I don't really want to do it for you, but I'd like you to take this question. Solve for x, 0 to 2 pi, for 2 cosine x equals 1. My only hint to you is to get rid of that 2. And from there, I'd like you to solve this question for tomorrow's class. All right, thanks again.